So you installed your crank, and now it's time to install the rods and pistons. First, what you gotta do is, if your if your block has been honed, what you're gonna have to do is clean out the cylinders, because there can be a lot of metal still in the bore. What you do is you get a rag, you dip it in ATF, and then you just uh, clean the entire bore out. And if the towel comes out gray, that means that there's metal. So you just continue wiping until there's no more gray that shows up on the towel. And when you're done, if you're planning on installing the pistons that same day or around the same time, just get a towel and wipe off all the ATF, and just don't put any more oil on the bores. Don't just leave it clean so we can check for a ring gap. But if you're not installing the pistons the same day as you're wiping them down, you can just leave the ATF on, and it will protect it from rust. So once ahead, you go and clean out all the bores. What you got to do now is start cleaning your piston rings, your rods, and your pistons and the pins. So what you got to do, if you're already got the bearings installed, but with the bearings off, if these are brand new rods or if they've been honed or bored or whatever, what you got to do is get that towel with the ATF on it and wipe them clean, because there's going to be metal on them. I'm not sure how much that really affects anything, but just go ahead and do that. With the stroker kit, the only problem I really had was the bushings were a little tight, so my machinist had them honed out. So go ahead and wipe those off as well. Go ahead and wipe and clean both sides of the bearings on each bearing. Pull out the pin, and you just spray some brake clean on your towel and just wipe it off. Even try to get the inside just a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure how necessary that is, but that's what I went and did. Wipe off the old lube off the ARP bolts if you're using them. This is what came with the rods in my kit. And now you're gonna want to do the same thing for the rings, all the rings. You're just gonna want to get a towel, spray some brake clean on them, and just wipe all of them off. What you can do is just get all the rings out of the packaging and just lay them on top of the bag it came in. And for the second ring, or the first ring, if yours has a marking, you gotta make sure that if yours has a marking, mine doesn't, just make sure that all the rings have that same marking, just to make sure that it's consistent. You don't install it upside down. And on the second ring, mine has a marking. What you can see is, if it has a marking, it's sometimes hard to see when you're installing it. So I went ahead and got the yellow marker, just add a dot on it, so I can tell that it's not upside down when I install it. Because these have a chamfer, you can see, and these have to go, in a certain direction. But these don't have anything, so it doesn't matter if you install it either way. But just make sure on both of the rings. You want to go ahead and try to clean out where the pin sits inside the piston. So after you have everything clean, what I went ahead and did is labeled all of my rods. As you can see, there's a 1. I already have everything else installed except for number 1. But I have number 1. I have both the piston and the rod numbered. But what you gotta do is make sure that they're numbered in the right direction. So all the odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, and 7, you add the number on the side with the big chamfer. So you can see there's a certain way these small block Chevy rods go. The big chamfer is always facing towards the front. As you can see, the little one faces towards the back. So, as you can see, all the odd numbers are gonna have the rod facing this way. The big chamfer facing the front. But all the even numbers, 2, 4, 6, and 8, are gonna have the big chamfer facing the rear. So what that means is no matter which piston you're installing, the big chamfer, so I have these type of pistons and they only go one way with the valve reliefs facing towards the intake on both sides. So what that means is that no matter what piston you have, no matter what number it is, piston's always going to be installed this way with the big chamfer to the left, going that way. If it's a even or odd, they all go to the left. Do not install the piston with the rod facing this way, with the chamfer going to the right, even if it's an odd or even number piston. They all go facing to the left, because that is to clear the crank. I'm not sure you can see that, but where the crank meets the journal, it's not a perfect 90-degree. It curves up. I'm not sure if I'm not really able to show you, but it doesn't meet at. Pretend this is the journal, is the crank. Doesn't meet like that. The journal curves up onto the crank, and that chamfer right there is to clear it so the rod doesn't hit it. So if you do install that wrong, your rotating assembly could bind and could stop the piston from can stop the entire crank from rotating. So you just gotta make sure that you're installing all of them towards the left. Big chamfer this way. Only if you have a piston that goes in one direction. But if you have a rebuild piston that has the 4 valve reliefs and it has the dot faces the front. So that means you also have the chamfer face towards the rod, towards the dot if you have a dot, but I don't. So it's time to install your rings. What you want to do is first start off with this ring. This is the expander ring. And the way this is installed is you just open it up, you just slide it into that big groove, and that's it. So what you gotta do is make sure the 2 parts where it meet, I'm sure you can see that spot I'm spreading out. You just gotta make sure they don't overlap. That's all you really gotta do. Next, you got these thinner rings. These are the oil control rings. There's 2 of them. One goes on the bottom, one goes on the top of the expander ring. And the way you install these, you don't spread these out like those. You gotta install them in a spiral motion. Let me see if I can get this on camera. I'm not sure if you can see, but just gotta install them in a spiral. And what you gotta do, when you're at the very end, you don't want the very edge of that ring to scratch up this side of the piston. So what you gotta do is push down and then spread out. And boom. There you go. And now you just gotta repeat it for the top ring as well. So right now it doesn't really matter the direction the gaps go, because we'll be doing that later. Even though some people say it really doesn't matter because the rings spin. I mean, they're probably correct, but it's still a nice little thing to do, safety wise. So now you get the second ring. So the second ring is the one that goes on the second groove, of course. And there was a little issue I had with one of the pistons I was installing. There was on the side somewhere, there was like a little dent, like the piston fell or something smacked it. And what happened was it wasn't allowing the ring to sit in it. And what would happen was the ring couldn't spin freely and it wouldn't install all the way. So what you could do with all your pistons is install the ring like this and just spin it around. And if it spins around smoothly, there's no bumps, like the ring doesn't like pop up or it gets really hard to spin, then you can go ahead and install it. That was the issue I had with one of my pistons. And what I did, if you have that same problem, got a little piece of 260 grit sandpaper. I just installed it inside the groove and it just sanded it out and I rotated smoothly. So to install these type of rings, what you're going to use is this style of installer. The one I have is it has a stop, so you don't overexpand the rings and snap them in half. But before you install those rings, what you're going to do is check for gap, and if you have ATF or any oil inside the bore, you want to get a towel, spray brake clean, just wipe it all off. So the way you install the ring is you want to squeeze the ring together, put it right down the middle of the bore, and straighten it out. And since you already installed the rings, the oil rings and the piston, what you can use is we're going to use the piston to push down the ring and have it square, because if it's not squared, it won't really it won't read correctly. Not sure if you can see that. I don't think I'll be able to. Yeah, look at that. So that's pretty square. And you're gonna wanna get some feeler gauges like these. And for mine, I'm usually looking around 20 to 21. So just get the feeler gauges and just slide it in. It's kind of hard to show you. You just slide it in, and if it doesn't fit, you go down a size until you find out what size it is. All right, so I found out, I believe this is around 16. 16 fits. Might be 17. But for what I'm doing, yeah, 17 barely fits. So it's around 16. So you're gonna have to find out what the ring gap should be on yours. For what I'm doing, it's gonna be around 20 to 21, maybe 19. So find out what your piston manufacturer suggests. If you're going boost or whatever power adder, it's gonna have to be wider. It's really all just different for every single build. But for mine, it's around 20, 21, 19. So this is below spec, so I'm gonna have to grind the ring to get a bigger clearance. I'm gonna install the top ring. This one's probably a little deep. Get the piston, push it down. Make sure that it's flat. I'm gonna start off with 18. So 18. Slides in perfectly. So we move up. 19. 19. Perfectly. So hoping it to be around 20. Sometimes when you pull out the rings, they one side goes up, one side moves up, which does increase the clearance and give you a false clearance. So every time you take out the feeler gauge, you wanna, just check out if it's still perfectly flat. And make sure that's flat. Yeah. So I'm gonna just go straight at 21. See what happens. A little tight. Does go in, but it's a little tight. So let's see 20. Okay, 20 goes in perfect. Not tight. All right, so top ring is 20. So that means I'm gonna make the bottom ring, going with the yellow dot, around 21. Just make it a little bit bigger than the top ring, so the gases that go through can escape and not get trapped in. So just pull out the side where the ring connects, where the ring meets. Just pull that up. Press the ring together. It'll come right out. So if you saw, that means we're gonna have to grind on the ring. Here's the grinder I'll be using. Got it from Summit Racing, Summit brand part. This is the part number. This comes in this little box. So what you do is you're only gonna grind one part of the ring. Let's see if I can show. I'm gonna see if you can see, but make sure that one side of the ring is perfectly flat with the wheel. And what I need to do is turn the wheel counterclockwise. And now these, now don't be spin it a few times and then check. May spin it like three times and then check again. Don't just be grinding it like you're a blacksmith or something. So just hold the ring close to the grinder. Just spin counterclockwise. All right. So now that this side is grinded, you're just gonna get a towel, some brake clean, and just completely spray the metal right off. And we're gonna go back and check. So after you clean that end of the ring, go ahead, squeeze it, slide it in. Get your piston, push it down, and then check that it's both of the ends are perfectly together. I'm gonna retry that. So there are tools that will perfectly square out your rings. I just don't have that yet. So the best thing you can really do is use a piston. So this was around 16 when I grinded it. Now I'm gonna check. This is 18. 18 slides perfectly. Just gonna go skip straight to 20. It's a little tight. We've got 19. 19 goes in perfectly. All right, so that means we're going to have to, well, I'm going to have to grind it maybe like 1 or 2 turns, and I'll come back, recheck it. All right, so give it maybe 2 turns, 2.5 turns. I'm going to go ahead and squeeze it, slide it down. With the piston. Push it down. Make sure that the gaps are with each other. I'm gonna grab my 21. 21. Slides right in. Now 22. 22 slides right in. So it seems like I went a little over. Little over is perfect because a little over is better than a little under. It seems like 22.5. So, I mean, that's perfectly fine. It's not like you're gonna be burning oil because of that or nothing. That's just better than being a little too tight. So what we're gonna do is you're gonna want to do that for every single ring that is a little bit under spec. Even though it's a tedious thing to do, you have to do it. Just checking every single ring, even if it's a pre-gap set. Just like these were pre-gapped, and I mean some of them were around 20, some of them were around 16. So that's just really something you shouldn't trust. Always check everything. Never assume. So if you use the grinder, you might have some metal dust left. What you can do is just get some tape. Just use the tape to pick it up. Just so when you're sweeping the table, that doesn't go everywhere and get in your lungs. You definitely don't want that in your lungs. Tape gets it all. Also, one more thing before you install these rings. If you had to use the grinder, there's going to be somewhat of a sharp edge left on the part that you grinded. I can feel right here. It's pretty sharp. But on this side, it's kind of smoothed out. What you're going to do is get like sandpaper or filer and just sand down those edges, especially this edge right here, because you don't want that scratching up your walls. So it's finally time to install the rings. After you check the gap, after you grind them down, after you wipe them off, it's finally time to install. So the way this tool works, it's basically just pliers, really. You just slide a ring in, you expand. But what I like to do is, I don't like to slide the entire ring in. I like to leave it halfway out like that. You can see the edge is sticking out, because that means that you don't have to expand it as wide to install it. Because if you install it if you push it in all the way, that means the installer, the pliers will have to clear the piston as well, which means you have to expand it even wider, which could break the ring. So I just like to install like that. What you just widen it until it can fit in. So you see how it's almost the same size as the top of the piston. And then from there, you just push it down. A little bit too small. So I can see the ring isn't in actually, because this side has to be pushed up. So just with your fingers, just push it in. There you go. Now the ring is fully in. Now what you want to do is just spin the ring around. Make sure that it spins freely. And tighten it a little. Spin around, see if it spins freely. And it does. And then time for the top ring. I'm gonna just do the same thing. Just have the ring half in. Expand it until it clears the top of the piston. Just install it. There you go. Just make sure that spins freely. And it does. And now it's time to install the rods. So since this is a floating pin, there are 2 clips that hold on to the pin. And these use pliers to install. And these are pretty difficult because there's a lot of tension on these. And if you don't install them correctly, they could just go flying out. So wear some glasses, some goggles, if you want, just to protect your eyes from these really sharp. I mean, they're not sharp, but they could get in your eyes. You don't want that. But they go into this groove. Oh, well, I can show you on this side. They go into this groove right there. So when you install it, just make sure that the entire thing is in the groove. So you only want to install one for now, because if you install the other one, how are you going to get the pin in? So before you install it, check the piston. You can see valve relief's up, which means big chamfer goes that way. So the number is facing towards the front, just like the big chamfer, so it goes like that. So you're gonna just go ahead, flip it over, just so you don't mistake the way it goes in. Get yourself a semi-lube. If you want, you can just add some to the inside of where the pin sits. You don't really have to, but nah, semi-lube doesn't really hurt much. Now you're gonna want to add some same lube inside the bushing. What you can do is you don't have to use your finger. Oh, you added way too much. You can just use the cap to spread around the lube. There you go. That's all lubed up. Since we were moving around the rods and the piston, go ahead and recheck. Okay, so it's upside down, so that means big chamfer goes this way. All right. Last thing to lube, pin. Put your finger inside the pin. We'll wipe it off first. Out of a pretty thick bead. And just wipe it all around it. Make sure that the entire pin gets lubed. You don't have to add a lot because a lot of this is going to get pushed out as you slide it in. I mean, I probably added way too much, but it's all going to get pushed out. I'm going to have this rag right here just for to catch everything that slides out. Now with the side that doesn't have the clip, of course, you're gonna have to slide in the pin. There you go. And then get your rod, line it up with the pin, slides right in. Remove your finger from the rod, from the pin. Slide it in. All right. As you can see, pushes out. So you don't really have to add a lot. Not just push the pin all the way until it stops. Got another towel. Wipe off of the lube that's on this side. And here comes the tricky part. Make sure I can get you closer. So you gotta squeeze this little clip pretty tight. I'm just using pliers. I'm sure there's a special tool for this, but you gotta squeeze them pretty tight and push them in. Now you might think that it's installed, but if you can see, that part popped up. So you want to get the pliers again, and just you want to move the clip with the pliers. So just squeeze it in and just rotate the pliers. Still not in. There you go. So you can see I didn't use my hands. I used the pliers to move the clip. As you can see, the clip is fully in. I'm gonna go on the other side. You wanna wipe that off as well. Just go ahead at both clips, just triple, quadruple check that both clips are in the groove and that they are. Go ahead, check that this moves around. Just check that it has lube, which it does. If you want, you can pull a little dot of lube and just move it around. So now that their rod is in, just go ahead, double check that all your rings spin. Bottom ring, your top ring, your middle ring, your lower rings. Make sure that they all spin freely. And they do. Now it's time to go oil up the bore, oil up the pistons, and oil up the compressor. So what I'm going to use is this PT pump oiler. Got it from Summit. It's steel. And before you add oil to this, what you want to do is you want to get mineral spirits or a cleaner or just some oil, because there's going to be metal shavings in here. And you just want to clean out the inside. You can just add mineral spirits or oil and just pump out all the metal shavings before you use it. Part number W241, lifetime warranty. This works pretty good. So you don't really need a lot of oil inside the bore. You just add maybe, we gotta pump it up first. Maybe like that much. And just get your glove, your hand, just wipe it around the entire cylinder. Get every single inch of it, from bottom to top. All right. Just go in Make sure everything is oiled up. So the ring compressor I'm using is this basic one from Harbor Freight. It worked pretty well for all the pistons I installed. You're gonna want to add oil as well. Not much. Probably like that much. I was probably a little too much. You know, do the same thing. Just if you want, you can wipe the entire thing in oil. I'm only gonna be using half of it, so I don't really need to wipe all of it in oil. All right. Get your piston. Just wipe off all the extra oil that's on your gloves. Before you do that, you want to make sure that your rings are installed correctly. Make sure your top ring is installed correctly. Make sure that the yellow dot, or the one I put, make sure that the dot or top is facing top on your second and first ring if you got that. And after you oil them up, that's when we go to align the rings. So just add a few drops of oil on each side. And of course you want to add a drop on the skirt, maybe a drop up here, drop on the side. Just go ahead and rub the entire thing. Make sure to add it a little oiled up. All right, so before you install the piston, make sure that the clips are on correctly. Make sure the rod itself is on correctly. So valve release up, big chamfer to the left, correct. Now we're gonna align the rings. So the top ring, compressor ring, is gonna go 12 o'clock, facing straight up. The second ring is gonna go 6 o'clock. And then one of the bottom oil rings is gonna go right here. That's maybe like 5 o'clock. And the other ring is gonna go right there. But if you try to spin that ring, all the rings are gonna spin. So what you wanna do before you spin the top ring is hold, it's a little difficult, hold the rings together, look for the gap, and then spin it. Because if you try to spin it without holding anything, all of these rings are gonna spin. So just double check. Second ring towards the bottom. Top ring, very top. These smaller rings, one right here, the other one right there. And that's it. So now it's time to install the compressor onto the piston. So all you do is you gotta expand it until it fits. Ooh. Just a little clip right here. Just to expand it. But since that's way too big, you get the thing that it comes with to tighten it. Just go ahead and tighten it until it's around the same size. Go ahead and make sure all the rings are in the right direction. Just hold one side like this. Start tightening it. And when it gets tight and doesn't want to tighten anymore, that's good. Just do it like that. Just make sure you have skirt showing out. Just make sure that the entire piston isn't inside the compressor. Now what we want to do is hold the piston. Don't hold the compressor, hold the piston. Slide it all the way in. You're gonna wanna push the piston in. And while you're holding it, you gotta hold it like this, because if you try to twist it like this, it would cause all the rings to spin. So you wanna hold the compressor back while tightening it. Oh, there you go. The piston just fell in the bore. Just try to get one or two more clicks. Looks pretty good. Just start tapping it in. Let me see if I can get one more. Just one more click. One or two more clicks. Nope. All right. So what you got to do is make sure at the bottom of the compressor is perfectly flat with the deck, because you don't want these rings to be popping out. And if one of the rings pop out, it's going to get stuck between the compressor and the deck. And if you keep on smacking it, you're going to snap a ring. And you're going to have to start all over. So just make sure that's perfectly flat. Just want to tap it around with a dead blow, and with the handle, slowly start smacking it down. And there you go. Once it's in, you just take it off. Okay, so once the piston is installed, you want to flip over the engine. What you want to do is have the crank. You want to try to do is have the journal of whichever piston is going in near the very top, just like that. So now what you're going to want to do is get your hand inside. Kind of hard. And like that. Get the dead blow or whatever you're using. Just start tapping it in. I mean, at first you can start going a little fast because you got a little ways to get there. But once you start getting close to the journal, like this, what you want to do is hold it, look straight down, and hold the rod with your hand, just so it doesn't end up smacking the journal and scratching it up. Now sometimes, just like this, the rod isn't perfectly straight, or the piston isn't straight, so you gotta twist it. So if you see that the rod is not going in straight, you can just try to twist it. It's kind of hard to do this with the camera in the way. But yeah, just check both sides while pushing it in. Almost there. There we go. So if your rods have a bolt, has like a stud sticking out, what you can do is get a rubber hose and stick it onto those threads so it doesn't scratch up the journal. Just smack it a little bit just to make sure it's perfectly in there. Now if you want, you can plastic gauge all of them. I actually went ahead and plastic gauged every single one, and it came out to be around about 1,500. But my machinist told me that they're around 2,000. But every time I plastic gauged, it came around to be 1,500. To get yourself your little piece. And if you can't open it like this one, just get this pick. Try to slide it into the little opening that's in, and just like that. And it should open. And there you go. There's your plastic gauge. Sometimes it's stuck to the paper, so you kind of have to mess with it. And then place it perfectly down in the center. That should be good. Don't throw away the paper because it has the gauge on it. Okay, so my rods came with this paper. It tells you the instructions, the torque setting. I have the ARP 8740, which is a 7/16 12-point socket, not a 6-point like the regular bolts, a 12-point. So make sure that you have a 12-point socket, or these won't work. I mean, you don't have to go buy one. Torques to 40 pounds. So on the cap, these caps don't just go in easily. You kind of got to tap them into place. Just go ahead and install it. Let me get a little. What you want to do is hold the piston and then smack the cap just a little, just so those dowels align with the rod, and just push the piston down. Well, you're pushing the piston up and then smacking the cap just so it goes in. I went in a little bit, but the piston pushed down. I'm going to smack a little harder. Not. There you go. And what that does is that you're pushing both of the ends of the rod and the cap together. So go ahead, clean off the old lube off the ARP bolts. Now what I'm doing is I'm using the socket. I'm using the socket to hold it in place while I add the lube. So what you want to do is add the lube to the bottom of the head and on all of the threads. So when you're done adding the lube, it should look something like this. Make sure there's lube on all the threads and at the bottom of the head. So installing the bolt might be a little tricky because you don't really want the bolt falling into the piston or into the anywhere inside the engine. So what you gotta do is grab this part of the bolt, hold the other side with the socket, just align it with the hole, let go of the bolt. There you go. And just start spinning it by hand. So my instructions say to tighten these up snugly. So I'm going to be evenly tightening them, just slowly, just so the cap sits perfectly flush. After that, we're going to torque it down. So check what spec your bolt should be. Mine are for 40 foot-pounds. So when you're torquing them down, what happened was the first time I was checking for the clearance, what happened was I was standing on this side and I was torquing it, and it somehow caused the crank to turn, which completely destroyed the plastic gauge. So I found out that standing like this and torquing it down like this won't cause the crank to turn. So I'm not sure how helpful that is, but it works for me. So the instructions say to torque them down in one motion. So that means don't go back and forth until it's 40. I'm gonna just go, from here and just go straight to 40. All right. Really gotta hold this stand. All right. I'm just gonna use it to loosen up as well. Since these rod caps are almost impossible to take out with hand, what you gotta do is don't take off the bolts, just almost take them off. Just leave them still threaded. What you're gonna do is get your dead blow, hold the piston, and just smack the ends, smack the bolts to separate the cap from the rod. There you go, it's split. Now just get your measurement from the piece of paper you cut off from the plastic gauge. And just line it up. And that's projected around 15. It's maybe a little smaller than 15. But yeah, every single one has been consistent at around 15. So I guess the clearance is 15. So once you wipe off the plastic gauge off the cap and the rod, off the journal, just get your dead blow or whatever, and just smack the rod down. Smack it into enough so you can access the bearing. So you're just gonna go ahead and wipe off the bearing. Wipe off the off the journal. Get your assembly lube. I'm gonna just spread it around. Try to get every single corner of the bearing. The very edges. All right. That's probably way too much, but it's perfectly fine. Just get your dead blow or whatever you're using. Just start smacking it back up. Okay. Remember to make sure that both ends are aligned. All right, go on ahead, install the cap. Make sure that the cap is facing the correct direction. Big chamfer towards the front. If it's an odd number piston, even numbers face towards the back. Let's go ahead and slightly type it in. And just go ahead, hand tighten the bolts. So once you hand tighten the bolts, go ahead and smack the piston back up, hold it, and then smack the cap to tighten it more. And hand tighten the bolts, and then snug them. You don't want to have them torqued down yet. Now you want to, after they're snug, torque them back to spec. If you remember, one motion. All right. You don't want to go back and forth torquing them to 40 or whatever your spec is. All right. And we're done. So just because you have everything torqued down does not mean that we're done measuring. So since this is a stroker kit, the block had to be machined out for the rods and the bolts to fit. Just go ahead and spin the crank. Make sure that the rod's clear, the machining on both sides, on every single piston, on every single rod. Go ahead and check, because if not, that's gonna cause a problem. What you're gonna wanna do is go ahead, pick up this crank socket. It's made for a small block Chevy, the Summit part. There's the part number. All it does is just slides over the crank, and it uses the keyway to spin the crank. Just get a 1/2-inch socket, just install it, and you'll be able to spin the entire crank without having to use a bolt, and that bolt might strip out the threads. Who knows? Very last measurement we gotta do is check rod end clearance. So what we gotta do is check the clearance between the crank and the rod, the rod and the rod, and the rod and the crank. And I read online, max should be around 15. So just get your 15 thou feeler gauge. What you want to do is just push all the rods back in this little gap right here. You just want to stick your feeler gauge in. As you can see, feeler gauge goes in. I'm going to move this rod back. Check in between the rods. Perfect. 15 thou fits perfect. I push all the rods back. Check in between this. Perfect. All right, so go ahead, check for every single rod, all 4 groups. And if you have 15 thou, or I mean, I'm sure a little bit more is okay. Just what I read online, you should be good. So, one thing I forgot to say, every time you install a piston and you lube it up after checking clearance, go ahead and do a complete rotation on it. Go ahead and spin it 4 times, 5 times, just to make sure that it doesn't bind and that it spins good. Go ahead and do this every single time you're installing a piston. Every single time. Because if you don't, and you install 08, you go ahead and spin it, and it doesn't want to spin, then you're gonna have to take them all out and restart. So every time you install a piston, of course, it's gonna be more difficult to spin because there's more friction from the rings. So just install one piston, spin it, install the other one, spin it every single time, just so there's no binding and you want it to start all over. Okay, also, very last measurement you want to do is get that crank socket, put it to your torque wrench, and what you want to do is check how much torque it takes to break away, to start the crank to spin, and while it's spinning, you should see no more than 20, 30 foot-pounds breakaway, and then while you're spinning, it should be around like 15, 20. Mine's around like 23, 25. So just go ahead and spin the crank a few times. Check the torque you're getting. If it's like something really high, like 30 or 40, you should really check what's wrong. But yeah, that's the after if that's good, then your entire rotating assembly is complete. And if you haven't yet, go ahead, put markings on all of the rod bolts, all facing the same direction, just to let you know that they're all torqued down. You know, just double, triple check they're all torqued. Just get yellow marker, just mark them just to let you know that they are torqued and that you don't have to go re-torque them again. All right, so in the next video, I'm going to be checking for piston deck height, and what that means is the relationship between the height of the piston and the deck. We're going to be checking the difference between that. My machinist told me it'll be around 15 thousandths, which is what I'm wanting, so I won't get high compression. I'm looking to be around 10.2, 10.1 with a 40 thousandths quench. And next video I'll be checking for deck height on all 4 corners to check that the decks have been surfaced perfectly straight and there's no difference between the front and the back. So if you have any questions, comments, just leave them down in the comments or just DM me on Instagram. Hopefully this video helps you guys out, and see ya.